Hello, and welcome to the volunteer training for Safe Sanctuaries and First United Methodist Church Monday. Thank you so much for volunteering to serve the kingdom of God through the ministry and programs held on our campus. As followers of Christ and as a congregation with the United Methodist Church denomination, we are 100% committed to providing a safe and secure environment for all children, youth, and adults who participate in church activities. Before we get started, here's a quick overview of what our training will cover. We're going to talk about why we have annual training for volunteers and for church staff at our function. Then we're going to talk about where and who to go to for medical assistance for things such as first aid, CPR. Third, we'll talk about what the best practices are for ministry with children, youth, and vulnerable adults in our. And finally, how to respond in a crisis event or situation where the evacuation or lockdown of our facility is necessary. Why do we have an annual training for our Safe Sanctuaries volunteers? Well, the short answer is because we take the teachings of Jesus Christ very seriously. Jesus taught his disciples to welcome children, include them in all the church ministries, but also to protect them. Jesus also warned those who harm children or hinder their discipleship by saying in Matthew 18, "Whoever welcomes a child welcomes me. And if any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones, it would be better if you had a great millstone fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea." Therefore, we take every measure to make sure that children are fully included in the ministry of the congregation. We welcome Jesus, and we welcome Jesus' children. But we also take every measure to ensure that they are protected from all forms of abuse, neglect, and danger while they are here. Another reason why we do this training is because churches, unfortunately, are not immune to abuse and violence. News headlines reporting incidents of child abuse and acts of terrorism on church grounds continue to increase every year. Not only are they heartbreaking, but they are devastating to the victims and their families, as well as the church congregation and the communities they happen in. And so, as the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so, our purpose for Safe Sanctuaries policies, initial background checks, annual volunteer training, and all that is entailed in our preparation is to uphold this uncompromising commitment to both the physical and emotional safety of all those who gather here. Lastly, if you are interested in a detailed copy of our church's Safe Sanctuaries Child Abuse Prevention Policy, they are available for you in the church office. Where do you go and who do you ask if you need medical assistance for anything from first aid to CPR? We have 2 first aid kits on church grounds, one in the church nursery on the 2nd floor by the stairs, and another one in the church kitchen of the fellowship hall. Just look for the little red cross sticker or ask someone for some help. In the event of a medical emergency that may require more intensive assistance for complications with choking or chest pains, all church staff members and nursery care workers are certified with first aid training. Have someone stay with the individual in distress while you go and get a church member or nursery worker who is certified with first aid, and be prepared to assist them further. In the event that a person needs help with CPR care or complications with choking and chest pains or passing out, church members and church staff who work in the nursery are CPR certified. So designate someone to stay with the person in distress. Go and get a CPR trained church member or employee for help. And then call 911 only if that staff member instructs you to do so. This is the best way to make sure that the appropriate level of care arrives in a timely manner and there is no confusion with those reporting to 911. So what are some of the best practices for child abuse prevention? Well, the most important part of this is our safe method for children. There could be so much that is said on discussing the important topic of how to prevent children from becoming abused or neglected in this environment and situation. But for the sake of time, we're going to focus on the safe method. You are more than welcome to find a lot more information available online for those who want to learn more. SAFE stands for Screening, Accountability, Faithful, and Expressing. The first SAFE method is keeping those who work with children screened in advance. Convicted sex offenders are required by law to register with local law enforcement, and depending on the level of their offense, they are also required to abstain from interacting with minors. Every Church of Christ, whether they are by denomination or affiliation of Christ, are open to all. And as United Methodists, we believe that our congregation should be open to everyone, regardless of their past. And so while we do not pass judgment on anyone for what God may have forgiven, we do use discernment in selecting our volunteers to keep all parties safe and to follow all legal requirements. Therefore, those who wish to participate in the worship and functions of the church, who have been convicted and are prior offenders with minors, are not permitted or condoned in the interaction with children. This is the primary reason for background checks for our church functions, and all information that is documented from background checks is kept on file in our church office to abide by legal regulations. The next step of the SAFE method is to have accountability partners. If you pay no attention to any other part of this training, pay attention to this one rule that will help you make sure the rest works out. Here's the number one rule. Use the buddy system. Always have two adults and never be alone with a child. That's it. That's the number one rule. It's what keeps our kids safe, and it's also what keeps you safe as a volunteer from any sort of misunderstanding or even false accusations. In the rare circumstance that you cannot find another adult, be sure to have another child or youth remain with you for a total of 3 children. And so, in other words, if you can't find an adult buddy, make sure the child has a child buddy until you can find a second adult to stay and take the place of that child. Now, in small and rural church settings, it's very common for people to know everyone and to ask favors of convenience. So let's say that a guardian of one of the VBS children, for example, asks you as a volunteer to bring their child home and give them a ride after VBS ends. What would you do in that situation? The best practice is use the buddy system. Before you agree to take that child home or give them a ride, make sure that you have convinced another adult to ride with you during that trip. Because our accountability measures are not just for the events themselves, but all forms of transit to and from church functions. Another great example of where you might be in need of the buddy system is if you are waiting with a group of children for them parents to pick them up after an event. So let's say you're down to yourself and 2 other children, and here comes the parent of one of those children. When that child leaves, you will be alone with a minor. What would you do in this situation? The best practice in that scenario would be for you to ask the parent who is picking up the second child to stay and wait for the few more minutes it will take for the next parents to arrive, so that at no point in time are you left alone with a child. Use the buddy system. Always use the buddy system. Now let's talk about what happens and what our process is if you witness or are suspicious of child abuse. And that is the F of faithful reporting. It is not only what you should do, it is what you must do as an affiliate of this congregation. By law, anyone who has regular contact with vulnerable persons, including those who work, for example, at Vacation Bible School at a church, must report any form of neglect, whether it's physical or sexual, or any other form of misconduct, to Family Protective Services and to the local law enforcement. And so, in the event that a child confides in you about some form of abuse, be sure to follow these next 3 steps very carefully. Number 1, listen for the names, dates, and details that the child gives. Who was it that committed the offense? What time did it happen? When and the day did it happen? What were they wearing? Was there anyone with you? What were you wearing? These kinds of details will help Family Protective Services agents conduct their investigation and affirm the report. Number 2, assure that a child, it was right for them to tell you about the abuse. Those who prey upon children often use fear as a form of manipulating the child from actually reporting the incident. They'll try to scare them to keep them from telling about the abuse. And so you need to make sure the child knows it is the right thing and not the wrong thing to do to tell when someone takes advantage of them. Number 3, affirm the child that he or she is not responsible for what happened. It is not right in the eyes of God or this congregation that any child should bear the weight of the shame and the guilt of being taken advantage of by someone who would prey upon children. That is not their burden to bear. Much violence has been done, and it is irreversible, and so we do not add to that with guilt or shame, because no child is responsible for that form of neglect and abuse. Therefore, it is crucially important that you affirm in that child that they are not responsible for what happened to them. We follow these 3 procedures of faithful reporting because this is the best way to make sure that any suspicious child abuse or neglect or any reported confide is taken care of accordingly. Unless you're a heart surgeon, you wouldn't perform open heart surgery on a child, right? And so unless you are a CPS investigator, you shouldn't try to attempt to investigate those kinds of things on your own. Think about it like this. God calls everyone to work justice and mercy and to proclaim the gospel. Sometimes he calls people to be volunteers in church functions and to help at Vacation Bible School. And sometimes he calls people to be Child Protective Services investigators. So live into your calling and allow others to do the same. And when in doubt, call the police. The last step of our SAFE method is how to express affection appropriately. Simply put, let children initiate contact and only offer or return their affection. Like most church people, I love to shake hands and give hugs, but it's important that we allow children to initiate all forms of physical contact with them. Therefore, it is an inappropriate action to demand that a child give you a hug or to give you a kiss or to do anything that child may or may not feel comfortable doing. So offer a handshake or a hug or to hold a hand in return when it is asked of you. We also like to give kids piggyback rides or allow them to sit on our shoulders, and kids love that too. But for the sake of the safety of the children and to keep all volunteers above reproach or any misunderstanding from happening, please limit your physical interactions and expressing affection with children to hugs, handshakes, and hand holding. Now, there is another time when physical contact is required with a child, and that usually is when a child is disruptive and has become violent. If a child is disruptive and is misbehaving, physical contact when disciplining that child is strictly prohibited on church grounds. In other words, it is not okay for you to spank or slap a child, even if that child is a member of your family or is your very own offspring. On church campus, it is strictly prohibited. But what about when children become violent and you know that child is about to physically harm another child, yourself, or themselves? The most appropriate response is to hold their hands with your hands aggressively, lock fingers with them, but do not grab their wrists, their arms, their shoulders, or grab them in the neck or put them in a chokehold or any other form of physical contact with them. Simply use your hands to restrain their hands. Lastly, we need to cover a few things about how to respond in a crisis event. In the event of severe weather, our church basement is the safest location on our campus and is also the designated storm shelter in our community. So lead those who are closest to you toward the church basement in the event of hailstorms and inclement weather. However, in the event of a gas leak or a fire, lead those who are closest to you toward the nearest exit and call 911 once you are a safe distance from the building. You will know this from the sound of smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors all throughout the building, or from those who are coming into your room yelling, "Fire! Gas leak! Get out of here!" Unfortunately, those are not the only forms of crisis that might happen. And so in the event of an active shooter in our building, you have three real options for you and your children: run, hide, or fight. If you're far away from a shooter, then run to the nearest exit. Get out as fast as possible and call 911 whenever you are safe so that you can conduct that conversation with the 911 operator and give them the most accurate information as quickly as possible. Now, if you are on an upper floor or you're in a room that is in between you and the exit with the shooter there, and you know that you cannot run away through the exit, hide behind a closable door in that room. Use a table, chairs, anything to barricade the door as quickly as possible. Turn off the lights and hide by standing against the wall that is on the same wall as the door. This way, if the intruder tries to enter the room, you can bar the door from entering, or you will have immediate physical contact when they enter the room, which is the best way to attempt to disable them in a closed door situation. However, if you are near the shooter and you do not have the option of running to the nearest exit or hiding out of sight, then at that point, fight with everything you've got to disable the shooter. Throw pew Bibles at them, hymnals, grab the fire extinguisher and spray it at them, throw it at them, anything you can do to disable them. If you're really close to the shooter, then you should charge and tackle the shooter, because it takes 21 feet of time for an active shooter to draw their weapon, to aim, and to fire accurately at an individual. And so if you're within 20 feet of that person, you can charge them and tackle them before they have the chance to fire their weapon. Plus, if you and several other adults are charging at an active shooter, that shooter will be concentrated on you as the immediate threat rather than on the children around you. And so this takes the threat away from our children and places them on the courageous adults who have courageously placed their faith in Christ and are assured of their eternal joy with God. Now, as a final note, when it comes to those who have a concealed handgun license, you should know that First United Methodist Church Munday does allow concealed carry on our church premises, but we do not allow open carry, belt holsters, or any other form of openly carried and visible handguns. So that being said, before you decide to bring a concealed handgun firearm with you to a church function or inside our church building, you need to consider the reason why you're bringing it indoors with you in the presence of children. If you are doing it so that you might be helpful in the event of an active shooter situation for your own self-defense and for the defense of the children, then I ask you to consider whether that concealed firearm will help you to be an asset or a liability in an active shooter situation. Are you going to be helpful or harmful in the event of a crisis? Do you know the answer to that? Well, consider two questions or two ideas before answering that question. If all you've ever taken is the basic concealed handgun license course, and you've had no additional training in crisis events or in close combat situations, then you are a liability. You're not an asset in the event of an active shooter situation. You don't have to take my word for this. You can ask any law enforcement officer, and they will tell you the same thing. So much happens in a crisis event, from adrenaline and situations thereof in your physical and emotional state, that unless you have proper training to deal with them, you are not prepared to be of help to those who are trying to stop the shooter. You would do more harm than good. Secondly, as every concealed handgun licensed person knows, if it has been over a year since you have fired your concealed handgun, then you are out of practice, and you are no longer an asset to the church. You are a liability in the event of an active shooter situation. I hope these two considering things will allow you to determine whether or not it is a good idea for you to bring a concealed handgun with you to any church function. If you have any questions about our training or Vacation Bible School or any of the events, I encourage you to call Tammy Trainum, our Vacation Bible School coordinator, at 940-203-1698, or contact us at the church office, 940-422-5144. Thank you so much for your commitment to Christ's kingdom, for your time in this training of the Safe Sanctuaries policy and procedures, and may God bless you richly in your ministry.